The ice groaned beneath us. A sound so deep, so alien, it felt less like frozen water cracking and more like the earth itself whispering in protest. The storm above howled across the endless white, rattling the corrugated metal walls of our makeshift drilling station. Antarctica had never been welcoming, but that night, it felt like it wanted us gone. When I first stepped off the transport plane onto the Antarctic plateau, I thought I understood isolation. The horizon stretched unbroken, nothing but ice and sky, a silence so complete it made your heartbeat sound intrusive. But even then, there was something else, something beneath. As though the continent wasn't just frozen wasteland, but a lid. A lid over something that had been waiting. Our team wasn't here for beauty, though. We were scientists, specialists handpicked for a classified mission funded by governments that never told us the full truth. The story was simple on paper. Drill deeper into the ancient ice than anyone had before, retrieve samples untouched for millions of years, and see what secrets the past still held. They called it Project Erebus. A name chosen, no doubt, for the volcano that burned in darkness not far from our station. But Erebus also meant something else, something out of Greek myth. Darkness. The shadow at the edge of the world. We drilled for weeks. Each day the bit screamed against the ice, cutting deeper into time itself. 4 kilometers down, 5, 6. By then, the pressure of history weighed on us all. Nights bled into days. Sleep became fragile and strange. Some of the crew claimed they heard things in the borehole, sounds rising up from the shaft, like water sloshing, like distant voices. The engineers brushed it off. The rest of us didn't. It was the 7th week when we broke through. The drill's vibrations changed first, less resistance, a strange shudder as if the earth swallowed the steel whole. Then the pressure gauges spiked. I stood at the console, staring at the numbers as alarms shrieked. The bit had punched through into something hollow. A cavern beneath the ice. Protocol demanded we stop. Seal the hole, log the anomaly, wait for the committee back home to decide our next move. But orders, when relayed across satellites, take hours. And curiosity is quicker. We lowered the probe. It was a narrow cylinder fitted with cameras, floodlights, and sampling arms. As the winch unspooled the cable, the probe descended into a darkness untouched since before humanity's first spark of fire. The feed flickered onto the monitors. At first, all we saw was ice, a pale tunnel gleaming like glass. Then, the walls fell away. We had entered a cavern larger than a cathedral. Our floodlights swept across black water, perfectly still. Stalactites of ice hung like teeth, glistening. And the air, yes, the probe detected air, was filled with condensation, fog coiling in the lights. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Renner, our biologist. "There shouldn't be air pockets at this depth. Not this big." The probe hovered just above the water's surface. For a moment, the cavern seemed lifeless. Empty. But then something moved. Not much. Just a ripple across the black mirror below. We held our breath, watching. The ripple grew, spreading outward in concentric rings. The floodlights caught flashes of something beneath the surface, pale shapes, long, slow, twisting. Too large to be fish. Too fluid to be ice. And then, the feed cut. Static hissed across the monitors, the probe's telemetry crashing into nonsense. The last frame froze on screen, a pale blur rising fast from the water. We yanked the probe up. The winch screamed as the cable recoiled, faster, faster, until the probe broke the surface of our world again. It was coated in something. Not just ice, not just water, but a slick layer of fibrous matter, like translucent threads of flesh. Strands pulsed faintly, like veins. That night, none of us slept. The sample analysis should have waited. But Renner, restless and electric with obsession, insisted on running it immediately. In the lab, under harsh fluorescent lights, we watched the microscope's lens bring the strands into focus. They weren't just organic, they were structured. Cells unlike anything on Earth. Dividing, regenerating. Still alive after millions of years entombed in ice. Renner's voice shook with awe. "This isn't bacteria. This is tissue. We should have stopped. We should have burned it, sealed the cavern, reported failure. But instead we studied. We couldn't help it. Discovery is a hunger sharper than fear. Within days, the strands began to change. At first, they grew in the petri dishes, weaving into delicate webs like frost. Then they pulsed, responding to light, to heat. By the fourth day, they reacted to movement, recoiling when hands neared, stretching toward vibrations. By the fifth, they escaped containment. It started small. A single dish overturned. Threads across the floor tiles. We burned them, scrubbed the lab clean, and doubled precautions. But the truth gnawed at us. Whatever we had pulled from the cavern wasn't passive. It was reaching, learning, waiting. And the drilling hadn't stopped. Even after the probe disaster, command back home pushed us forward. Collect more samples, the orders said. Document extensively. We lowered new equipment, this time stronger, shielded, armed with failsafes. But no failsafe could protect us from what stirred below. 2 nights later, during a whiteout storm that battered the station, the screaming began. I woke to it, raw, animal, echoing through the steel corridors. We tore from our bunks, grabbing headlamps, slipping on boots. The sound came from the drilling bay. The air inside was freezing, our breath fogging in frantic bursts. And there, sprawled across the floor, was Callahan, our mechanic. Or what was left of him. His body was covered in strands. They writhed across his face, down his arms, burrowing into his skin. His eyes were wide open, glassy, his mouth frozen mid-scream. The threads pulsed like veins under his flesh, tightening as if knitting him into something else. Renner staggered back, whispering, It's using him." Before anyone could move, Callahan's body jerked. His chest convulsed, his limbs twitching like a marionette tugged by unseen strings. And then he rose. The strands weren't just alive. They were awake. Callahan's body rose with a grotesque stiffness, his joints popping as though forced into motion by invisible wires. His head lolled to one side, mouth hanging open, but the strands pulsed beneath his skin, tightening, reshaping, learning how to use him. We froze. None of us moved. The only sound was the storm outside and the wet, fibrous hum of the thing puppeteering our crewmate. "Callahan," I whispered, though I don't know why. Some desperate instinct, hoping he was still in there somewhere. His body jerked at the sound. Slowly, impossibly, his head turned toward me. His eyes, oh God, his eyes flickered with something like recognition. A flash of humanity beneath the glossy glaze. And then it was gone. The strands tightened across his cheeks, pulling his lips into a twitching, unnatural grin. Renner hissed, "It's communicating." Communicating or mocking, we couldn't tell. Then it lunged. The thing that was once Callahan charged with a sudden burst of violence, knocking over tables, scattering instruments. We scattered, each of us screaming, ducking for cover. The sound of boots on steel grated with panic, the fluorescent lights flickering as though even the power grid recoiled in fear. Gonzalez, our engineer, grabbed the nearest thing at hand, a crowbar. He swung with a cry, slamming the metal across Callahan's chest. The body staggered, but didn't fall. The strands pulsed in response, tightening, healing the dent before our eyes. "Jesus Christ," Gonzalez gasped. It doesn't even feel pain." But it did respond. The strands recoiled from the light above, shivering, twitching like worms on a hot plate. Renner shouted, "The lights! More light! Turn them up!" I bolted to the wall panel, slamming the floodlights to full power. The bay flooded with blinding white, shadows banished. The strands writhed violently beneath Callahan's skin, smoke rising as if burning. He shrieked, high, shrill, inhuman. Not Callahan's voice anymore, but something older, borrowed, tormented. The body convulsed, staggering backward, and then collapsed in a heap. The strands loosened, retreating from the light. They wriggled out through his torn skin, slithering across the floor, retreating into the cracks of the station's steel like rats fleeing a fire. For a long moment, none of us spoke. We only listened to the hiss of the storm beyond the walls and the labored breathing of our small, terrified group. Callahan's body lay still now, just a husk. His face frozen in that twisted grimace, emptied of anything human. Renner broke the silence. His voice shook but burned with obsession. "Do you understand what this means? This isn't just life, it's adaptive, parasitic, intelligent. We've discovered something that can merge with higher organisms. Something that can use them. No, Gonzalez snapped, throwing the crowbar to the ground. We haven't discovered anything. We've unleashed it. And deep down, I knew Gonzalez was right. We burned Callahan's body that night. Hauled him to the incinerator, wrapped in tarps, refusing to look too closely at the way the strands still twitched across his flesh. The fire roared, hungry, and for a moment we convinced ourselves it was enough. But the hole was still open. That gaping wound in the ice, that tunnel into the cavern below, it wasn't just a mistake. It was an invitation. And something had already accepted. Over the next days, tension split us apart. Command back home demanded updates, but we didn't tell them the truth. How could we? Who would believe us if we said a parasite older than human history had already claimed one of us? We sent partial reports, anomalous organic material, unconfirmed biological activity. Sanitized words that masked the horror under our roof. But the horror wasn't staying contained. It started with small things. Supplies missing from the storage bay. The echo of footsteps in empty corridors. Doors left open we swore we'd closed. At night, I woke to the faint scratching of something moving inside the walls. And then came the second attack. Dr. Renner had locked himself in the biology lab, running tests obsessively, ignoring sleep, food, and every warning we gave him. He claimed he could control the strands, learn their behavior. That with the right containment, we could study it. When the screaming started, we knew we'd lost him too. By the time we broke the lock, Renner was already gone. The strands had bloomed across the walls like frost, weaving into a pulsing cocoon. His face was visible for a moment inside, pressed against the membrane, mouth open in a silent scream. And then it sank into the mass, pulled deeper until nothing human remained. The cocoon shuddered, alive, spreading across the lab's walls, dripping with translucent ichor. Gonzalez torched it with a flamethrower we'd scavenged from emergency gear, the heat filling the air with the stench of burning flesh and chemicals. But even as the fire ate it away, I knew it wasn't the end. Not while the cavern still breathed beneath us. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of metal, every gust of wind outside, felt like the ice itself was watching us. We huddled in the mess hall at night, taking shifts to guard the doors. Gonzalez sharpened tools into weapons. I counted the dwindling rations, silently calculating how long we could survive if the situation worsened. But worst of all were the whispers. At first, I thought it was the storm, wind pushing through cracks, echoing in strange harmonics. But it grew clearer, closer. Words in no language I knew, threading through the walls like radio static. Sometimes, I woke to find my crewmates staring into the dark, lips moving, repeating sounds they couldn't possibly understand. The strands weren't just alive. They were reaching for us. Crawling into our dreams, into our minds. On the 12th day after Callahan's death, we made a decision. We had to seal the hole. Not just pause drilling, not just contain samples, but bury it. Collapse the shaft, destroy any chance of something rising from below. It was the only way. Arming ourselves with explosives from the geology stores, we prepared to descend to the drilling bay. But when we arrived, we stopped cold. The bay was already open. The hatch to the borehole yawned wide. Frost slicked the steel, condensation curling upward like breath. And at the rim, strands pulsed, weaving into shapes that shimmered in the floodlights. Shapes that almost looked like hands. Gonzalez cursed under his breath. It's coming up. We didn't hesitate. We set charges along the supports, primed them to collapse the tunnel. As we worked, the strands quivered, retracting slightly, as though they knew. As though they were watching. And then the floor shook. From the hole, a sound rose. Not just noise, but a resonance that rattled our bones. A chorus of voices, layered, inhuman, filled with something that was not rage but hunger. The black water below rippled, the cavern groaning, and for a moment I thought the entire continent might split open. We ran. The detonator clutched in Gonzalez's hands, sweat freezing on his brow. When the charges blew, the ground leapt, ice shattering, steel screaming. The shaft collapsed inward, a plume of snow and vapor erupting into the air. The floodlights exploded, plunging us into darkness as the last echoes of the blast faded into silence. We thought it was over. But then the silence breathed. A long, slow exhale from beneath the ice. And we realized, all we had done was wake it. That night, the storm stopped. For weeks, the winds had howled without rest, but now the sky above the plateau was unnervingly still. We stepped outside, boots crunching on brittle snow, staring out at the horizon. The world was silent. Too silent. And then we saw them. Shapes moving across the ice. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Pale figures, crawling on all fours, their limbs stretched too long, their heads tilted back as though sniffing the air. From a distance, they looked human. But they were not. Not anymore. They were coming from the direction of the collapsed shaft. "God help us," Gonzalez whispered. We stumbled back inside, sealing the doors, barricading the windows. But deep down, we knew the truth. Antarctica wasn't empty. It never had been. The ice wasn't a wasteland, it was a prison. And we had broken the lock. Now the prisoners were free. And they were coming for us. They came at nightfall. The pale figures we had seen on the horizon hours earlier now crept closer, their silhouettes etched against the dim glow of the aurora. At first, they moved with an awkward, staggering gait, like newborns learning to walk. But as they neared, their movements sharpened, grew more coordinated. Their heads tilted in unison, listening, scenting. Every few steps, one of them twitched violently, as if a current passed through the entire horde at once. We watched from the observation window of the mess hall, too horrified to speak. Gonzalez tightened his grip on the crowbar he still carried everywhere, as though steel alone could protect us from what was coming. "Are they people?" Anders, the youngest of our crew, asked. His voice cracked with disbelief. "They were," I said. The figures reached the outer perimeter of our floodlights. That's when the details became clear. Their skin was translucent, stretched taut over sharp bones, glowing faintly with the pulse of the strands inside them. Their eyes bulged, milky and sightless, but they didn't stumble. They moved with a terrible precision, guided by something deeper than sight. Some still wore scraps of tattered clothing frozen to their bodies, faded insignias, rotted boots. Old. Too old. Renner had once theorized aloud that life beneath the ice might have evolved in isolation, untouched since prehistoric times. But this was worse. These things weren't born down there. They were taken. "Explorers," I whispered, bile rising in my throat. "Expeditions that vanished. They didn't die in the cold. They were claimed. And now they surrounded us." The station groaned as the first of them reached the steel walls. Fingers, too long, jointed strangely, scrabbled against the metal, testing seams, probing vents. We backed away from the window, hearts pounding. "They can't get in," Gonzalez muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. "Steel's reinforced. We'll hold." But we all heard it, the faint hiss of air through hairline cracks, the shift in pressure. The station was sealed against storms, not against an enemy that knew how to look for weaknesses. And then came the sound that froze my blood. A voice. It wasn't speech, not truly. But it used Callahan's voice, his tone, his cadence. The words warped, dragged through static, repeating from a throat that wasn't his anymore. "Open the door." We staggered back. Anders clutched my arm so tightly I felt nails pierce through my coat. The voice came again, closer this time, the words broken into fragments. "Open, please, it's cold, so cold." It was cruel. Deliberately cruel. Gonzalez slammed his fist against the wall. "It's playing with us." But I wasn't so sure. The strands had studied us, listened to us. They had learned. If they could wear Callahan's voice, how long before they wore our thoughts, too? We tried to ration our power. Lights stayed on at full strength, our only proven defense, but the generators strained under the load. Diesel reserves were low. If the lights failed, even for a minute, we'd be swallowed whole. 3 nights passed like this, the pale figures never leaving. They circled the station endlessly, scratching at the walls, whispering through vents, mocking us with stolen voices. We barely slept. Every thud against the steel, every scrape of nails, kept us awake. On the 4th night, they changed tactics. The alarms shrieked at 3 a.m., pressure drop in Section C, the engineering bay. We rushed there, weapons in hand. The door hissed open to a scene of ruin. The walls were slick with frost, the vents pried open from outside. And Gonzalez. He was gone. His tools lay scattered across the floor, a trail of blood leading toward the borehole bay. "No," Anders whispered, shaking his head violently. "No, he wouldn't go down there." But the trail told us everything. They hadn't breached the bay by force. They had called to him, whispered to him in some way we couldn't hear. And Gonzalez had answered. We followed the trail to the drilling platform. The shaft we had collapsed weeks earlier was buried under rubble and ice. But something moved there, shifting, burrowing, as if tunneling upward. The collapsed shaft wasn't a barrier anymore. It was a door in the process of reopening. And standing at the edge of the rubble was Gonzalez. He turned when he heard us, his face pale in the floodlights. For a fleeting second, he looked like himself, tired, hollow-eyed, but human. And then he smiled. Not his smile. Too wide, too rigid. "You don't understand," he said, voice steady, wrong. "It wants us. It chose us. Down there, there's no hunger, no pain. We'll be part of something greater." Anders raised the pistol we'd scavenged weeks earlier. His hands shook. "Step back, Gonzalez. Step back or—" The words died in his throat. Because strands pulsed beneath Gonzalez's skin, wriggling just under the surface of his neck, his jaw, his arms. Already inside him. He spread his arms wide, eyes glassy. "It's already begun." The rubble shifted then, violently. A fissure opened, and from below, a rush of black water and fog exploded upward. Shapes writhed within it, pale and immense, like serpents coiling just out of sight. Gonzalez laughed, a sound not his own, as the strands beneath his flesh erupted outward, piercing his skin, spreading like wings. We opened fire. Bullets tore into him, shredding flesh, but the strands only screamed, shrill and furious, before dragging him into the fissure below. His laughter echoed long after he was gone. And in the silence that followed, we realized the shaft was open again. We barricaded ourselves in the communications room. The horde outside grew restless, scratching louder, pounding harder, as though the death of Gonzalez had enraged them. Anders stared blankly at the floor, rocking back and forth. "We're not going to make it. We're not." I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Listen. We're still alive. That means we have a chance. We need to send a message. A warning. If anyone comes after us, if anyone even tries, they need to know what's waiting." He swallowed hard. "And then what? Even if someone hears us, help is months away. We'll be dead before then." I didn't answer. Because he was right. Still, we worked. The long-range transmitter was fragile, built for weather reports and supply requests. But we overloaded it, pushed its limits, forcing a signal through the frozen sky. Static roared. The aurora above bent radio waves like wet reeds. But we managed to record a message. "This is Project Erebus, Antarctic Plateau. Do not send rescue. Do not approach." We drilled into something alive beneath the ice. It's awake. It's spreading. If you hear this, seal the continent. Burn it if you have to. We sent it into the void. Over and over. Until the generator sputtered. And then the lights went out. Darkness consumed the station. No hum of power. No glow of floodlights. Just the distant scratching of pale fingers against steel. Anders whimpered, fumbling for a flashlight. I found mine, flicking it on, its narrow beam cutting through the dark. The walls seemed to move in its glow, shadows writhing like they were alive. The scratching stopped. Silence pressed in on us. Too heavy. Too deliberate. Then came the whisper. Not outside. Inside. Right behind us. We turned slowly, beams trembling, and saw the wall pulsing. The strands had come through the vents, silent, unnoticed, and now they spread like veins across the steel, weaving together, forming shapes. Faces. Dozens of them. Pressed against the strands, mouthing words. Callahan. Renner. Gonzalez. Their dead eyes stared at us, mouths opening and closing in perfect unison. "Join us." And the walls burst. The horde poured in. Pale figures crashing through vents, strands whipping forward, seizing, binding. The room erupted in chaos, Anders screaming, firing wildly, me swinging the flashlight like a weapon. Each burst of light burned the strands, made them recoil, but there were too many. Too fast. One wrapped around Anders's leg, dragging him down. He fired until the pistol clicked empty, his cries muffled as the strands swallowed him whole. His hand reached for me, trembling, desperate, before vanishing into the mass. I ran. Through corridors collapsing with vines of flesh and ice. Past doors bulging with pale arms reaching through. Past windows where the aurora glowed blood-red in the reflection of things rising from the snow. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Now I write this in the last lit corner of the station, the generator room, powered by a single emergency cell. The lights flicker, and I know it won't last. The walls are pulsing again. The whispers are clearer now. They no longer borrow Callahan's voice. Now, they use mine. It's cold, they say, in my tone, my cadence. Let us in. I don't know how much longer I can resist. But if anyone finds this, if my words reach beyond this frozen grave, remember, Antarctica isn't lifeless. It's not barren. It's a prison. And we were the fools who opened the door. The emergency light above me flickered, a stuttering heartbeat of pale fluorescence that painted the walls in sickly intervals. Every time it dimmed, I imagined the strands creeping closer, stretching toward me in the half-second of darkness. And every time it returned, I half expected the room to already be filled with them. I had barricaded the door with tool crates, chained it shut, sealed the vents with metal sheeting. But the truth clawed at me. This wasn't protection, it was a delay. Nothing held forever against something that never stopped moving, never stopped learning. For 2 days, I remained in the generator room, gnawing on ration bars, drinking meltwater from the pipes. I wrote notes in my journal, careful block letters in case no one could read my shaking hand. Do not drill. Do not open the ice. Do not listen to the voices. But the voices didn't stop. They whispered through the walls, sometimes using Anders's voice, sometimes Gonzalez's. More often now, they used mine. Perfectly mimicked, down to the rasp of my breath. It was like hearing myself argue from the other side of the door. Open it, my voice urged. You're not alone. We can help you. We can make the fear stop. At first, I resisted by plugging my ears, singing to myself, anything to drown them out. But the whispers didn't need sound. They found their way into my dreams. I saw Renner smiling through strands of ice. Callahan's face pressed against translucent membranes, laughing as though nothing had happened. They told me things about myself I had never spoken aloud. Memories buried so deep they should have been safe. And in that moment, I knew the truth. They weren't whispering to me. They were whispering through me. On the third night, the light died. I had no warning. One moment it flickered as usual. The next, blackness swallowed everything. My breath hitched. The generator groaned its last sigh, then fell silent. I clutched my flashlight, flicked it on. The narrow beam cut through the dark, and the walls around me writhed. Strands crawled through the seams of the barricade, glistening like veins filled with cold fire. They pulsed at the light, recoiling, twitching, but they didn't retreat. They were patient. They knew batteries drained. And so I made my decision. I couldn't wait to be consumed in the dark. I had to move. The station was unrecognizable. Corridors sagged with webs of tissue. Doors gaped like mouths, their hinges bent into grotesque angles. Frost coated the floors, slick with fluids that steamed faintly, as though the building itself was bleeding. The air stank of rot and salt, of things that should never breathe. I moved carefully, flashlight beam trembling across the hall. Each time it passed over a wall, faces stared back. Dozens of them, human features half-formed in the membranes, their mouths opening and closing in silent cries. Some I knew, Anders, Callahan, Renner, others were strangers, explorers lost to history, pilots who never returned. Their eyes rolled toward the light, following me, accusing me. This is your fault, their faces seemed to say. You opened the door. I kept moving. The communications room was my goal. If the long-range transmitter still had power, Maybe I could send one last signal. Or at least erase what we'd already sent, make sure no one else came. But when I reached it, my heart sank. The door hung open, twisted off its frame. Inside, the equipment was fused with strands, wires threaded with pulsing veins. The radio console still glowed faintly, its screen alive, but the sounds it emitted weren't static. They were voices. My voice, multiplied, layered, overlapping into a chorus. "This is Project Erebus," the voices said. "Come quickly. We need you. Bring everyone." And with horror, I realized it wasn't sending a warning anymore. It was bait. I smashed the console with a fire axe. Sparks burst, screens shattered, voices warped into a final, shrieking pitch before silencing. The smell of burning plastic filled the room, and for a fleeting second I felt victorious. But then the walls shuddered. A tremor rippled through the station, violent enough to throw me against the console's remains. Dust rained from the ceiling. From deep below, a sound rose, like an ocean wave crashing, but slower, deeper, resonating through the bones of the world. The fissure we had collapsed was no longer collapsed. Something vast was moving upward, cracking the earth as easily as glass. I had to leave. Outside, Antarctica had changed. The plateau was no longer white and empty. Black water had ruptured through fissures in the ice, steaming under the night sky. Great towers of translucent flesh and ice rose like coral, pulsing with inner light, casting the snow in a sickly glow. The aurora above twisted unnaturally, colors writhing in sync with the pulses below, as if the sky itself was infected. And across the plain, the pale figures gathered. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all swaying in unison. Their mouths moved soundlessly, their eyeless faces tilted toward the horizon. I followed their gaze. The ocean. The coast was far from us, hundreds of miles of ice between here and the Antarctic shore. But I knew their plan. They weren't content with this frozen prison. They were moving toward the water. Toward currents that would carry them beyond Antarctica. To the rest of the world. "No," I whispered. My breath plumed into the night air. "No, you can't leave here. You can't." But they could. And they would. I staggered back inside, scrambling for explosives. We still had crates of seismic charges stored for geology surveys. If I couldn't stop them from rising, maybe I could bury them again. Not just the shaft, all of it. The station, the fissures, the nest that was spreading beneath the ice. If I triggered the charges along the perimeter, it might collapse the plateau. Drop everything back into the abyss it came from. Maybe it wouldn't work. Maybe it would only wake them further. But it was the only chance. I dragged the crates outside, hands numb, lungs burning in the cold. The figures didn't move to stop me. They didn't need to. They just watched, swaying, whispering with mouths that never closed. "Join us," they mouthed. I ignored them, planting the charges, wiring the detonator. My flashlight flickered with every step. The night pressed heavier, the aurora staining the world crimson. When I finished, I stood at the edge of the plateau, detonator in hand. My breath came in ragged gasps, my fingers trembling over the trigger. And that's when I saw them. The faces of my crew. Not in the crowd, not among the figures swaying on the plain, but right beside me. Renner, Callahan, Gonzalez, Anders. They looked whole again, human again, standing in the snow with soft smiles. No strands, no milky eyes. Just the people I had once trusted. "You don't have to do this," Renner said gently. His breath fogged in the cold. "You can come with us. It's beautiful down there. No pain. No fear. Only forever." Anders stepped forward, his eyes shining. "Please. We need you. Don't leave us alone." I knew it was a trick. I knew. But my heart lurched all the same. Their voices sounded real. Their faces looked real. "Please," they begged. "Just put it down. Let us show you." My thumb hovered over the trigger. The detonator felt impossibly heavy in my hand. And in that moment, I realized the strands weren't trying to kill me. They wanted me to choose. To step willingly into them. Because once I did, they wouldn't just have my body. They'd have my will. My belief. "No," I whispered. My voice cracked, but it was steady. You won't leave this place. Not ever. And I pressed the trigger. The world erupted. The ground split, shrieking, as explosions thundered in a chain. The plateau collapsed in waves, steel and ice plunging into the abyss below. Towers of flesh shattered, spraying ichor that steamed on the snow. Figures screamed in unison, their voices piercing the night as the earth swallowed them whole. The station folded inward, torn apart, consumed by the chasm. The aurora above flickered, spasmed, then bled away into blackness. And I fell with it. I don't remember hitting the bottom. Only the cold. And the dark. And the sense that the fall had no end. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't dead. I lay on a bed of ice in a cavern larger than anything I had ever imagined. Black water stretched endlessly, glimmering with faint, pulsing light. The air was warm, wet, filled with the smell of salt and rot. And all around me, the walls breathed. I was inside the nest. Shapes moved beneath the water's surface, vast, pale forms twisting lazily, like gods stirring in their sleep. Above me, membranes quivered, filled with faces pressed against them, mouthing in silence. I staggered to my feet, the detonator still clutched uselessly in my hand. And then I heard it. Not whispers. Not voices. But one voice. Immense. Patient. As old as the ice itself. The cavern pulsed like the inside of a living lung. Each inhale was a deep, sucking draft of air that pulled frost and snow from cracks above. Each exhale was a humid blast that stank of salt, copper, and decay. I stumbled to my knees on the slick floor of ice, staring into black water that stretched further than the beam of my flashlight could reach. And then I realized, my flashlight was gone. I hadn't turned it on. Yet the cavern glowed. Pale veins of light ran through the walls, webbed into the ceiling, and plunged into the water. They pulsed in rhythm, converging toward a single point deeper in the cavern. Something vast stirred there, eclipsed by distance, size, and shadow. "We are awake," the voice thundered. Not in sound, but in my marrow. My ribs vibrated with it. My teeth buzzed. My thoughts bent like reeds in a current. I tried to stand. My legs shook. My hands trembled. The detonator was still clutched in my grip, but it was ruined, the casing split from the fall. My only weapon was broken. "I buried you," I croaked, though my voice was swallowed by the cavern. "I buried you all." "We do not sleep as you do," the voice replied. The ice was a veil. Thin. Fragile. Time is nothing to us. You tore the veil. You let the current flow again. Images filled my head. The first explorers, long before us, stumbling onto the fissure. Their blood freezing on the ice as they screamed. The ocean below, black and infinite, holding things that had never seen the sun. Civilizations rising and falling while the Hive waited. Humans carving cities, fighting wars, believing they were alone. All while this patient hunger pulsed beneath Antarctica, watching, waiting. I clutched my skull. The visions threatened to split me apart. "Why me?" "Because you listened," it said simply. "You felt us. Even when the others denied, you believed. That is why you survived the fire. That is why you are here, standing before us. You are chosen." "Chosen for what?" My voice cracked. The water boiled. Something surfaced. A tower of pale tissue rose from the depths, glistening, steaming. At first it seemed like one mass, but as it unfurled, I saw shapes within it. Faces, torsos, hands pressed against translucent walls. Hundreds. Thousands. Their mouths moved in silent unison, forming one vast choir without sound. Renner's face slid into view. Anders. Callahan. Gonzalez. Even faces I didn't know. Explorers, soldiers, children. All fused together in the undulating wall of flesh. Their eyes found me. Their lips moved in harmony. "Come," they mouthed. The Hive's voice returned, deeper than oceans. "The world above is fractured. Dying. You burn your skies, poison your seas, kill each other without reason. We are unity. We are forever. Join us, and you will never be alone again." For a moment, I wanted to. The thought slid into me like warm water, filling the cracks of my fear. The faces were calm, almost blissful. No hunger, no loneliness, no pain. Just one endless harmony. The hive promised to strip away every terror I had carried. Every night I had lain awake, drowning in silence. I stepped closer to the water's edge. The surface shifted, rising to meet me. Tendrils broke free, glistening like strands of glass, reaching for my hands. They trembled in the air, hesitant, patient, waiting for me to close the distance. I raised my hand. And then I heard another voice. Not theirs. My own. The echo of what I had whispered to myself in the generator room, scribbled in my journal, desperate not to forget. Do not drill. Do not open the ice. Do not listen to the voices. I froze. The tendrils quivered inches from my skin, eager to close around me. No, I whispered. This time, to myself. This time, I meant it. You're not unity. You're hunger. You're a mouth that never closes. You don't want me. You want everything. The faces pressed harder against the wall of flesh, mouths contorting in silent screams. The hive's voice darkened, filling the cavern with rage. You will join us. All rivers flow to the sea. You are water. You cannot fight the tide. I staggered back. My ruined detonator sparked weakly in my grip. My other hand brushed against the satchel at my hip, and I felt it. Flares. I had carried them without thinking, clipped from the generator room wall. Short burn, blindingly bright, enough to cut through blizzard wideouts. And if there was one thing the strands hated, it was light. I tore one free, struck it against the floor. It burst alive, crimson fire filling the cavern. The hive recoiled. The faces writhed, mouths splitting into shrieks that shattered silence. The tendrils whipped back, sizzling in the flare's heat. The entire cavern pulsed erratically, veins spasming with chaotic light. I screamed and ran. The tunnels twisted endlessly, walls collapsing, strands slashing across my path. I burned through flares one by one, the red glow my only shield. Each time one guttered low, the hive pressed closer, whispering in 1,000 voices at once. You can't leave. We are already in you. Your blood remembers us. I ignored them. I ran until my lungs burned, until the flare singed my fingers, until the tunnel ahead opened into a shaft of pale light. I clawed upward, hands bleeding against jagged ice, flare clenched between my teeth. The shaft narrowed, the light grew, until I burst through snow into freezing night air. The plateau was gone. The station was gone. Nothing remained but a crater stretching for miles, still steaming from the detonations. But the horizon. The fissures were spreading. Lines of black water veined outward from the crater, racing toward the coast. Toward the sea. I fell to my knees, flare hissing in the snow beside me. My breath came in ragged sobs. I had delayed them, wounded them, but I hadn't stopped them. The hive was too vast, too patient. Antarctica couldn't contain it anymore. It was going to reach the ocean. And then, there would be no stopping it. That was weeks ago. I don't remember how I made it to the emergency depot, or how long I wandered before the rescue plane spotted me. The doctors said frostbite had eaten through half my toes. My skin still itches where the strands touched me. They say the voices are trauma, hallucinations from stress and isolation. But at night, I still hear them. Not whispers anymore. Not begging. Just waiting. Because they know the fissures are growing. They know the water will carry them out, into the currents, into every ocean. They know time means nothing. And every time I close my eyes, I feel the tide rising inside me.